You should be recording this because this is good. You should be recording this. Are you recording it? Okay, because this is amazing. First off, your son works at LinkedIn.
He works at LinkedIn, so he ought to set me up with a sweet deal. I told you the story.
There's no sweet deal. You literally just have to sign up. It's free.
Did I tell you the story about my 2 LinkedIn accounts?
No.
Okay, so this is why
Did
it's
you
a little
hack or something?
confusing.
What happened?
No, so like 2 years ago maybe, I set up a LinkedIn account, but I only put like half the information and I never paid attention to it. Every once in a while, LinkedIn would send me a message saying, so-and-so wants to be your friend.
Yeah, everybody wants to be your friend. You're not accepting any of them.
And so this past Christmas when I found out Bennett was working for LinkedIn, he said, we're going to sit down over Christmas and we're going to set you up. So I took like 2 hours one day and I got on my LinkedIn account and I put in like all the relevant information, my demographics, my education, and all the rest of that. And at the tail end, he goes, okay, you're all set up. And he goes, wait a second. He said, this is your work email. And I said, yeah. And he goes, you don't want to set it up with your work email because if you leave work, you want to have all this information.
You're screwed, right.
And at that point, we realized I had 2 LinkedIn accounts. I had one with my work email and one with my home email. And they were both not synced up there. And so I said, okay. I said, Bennett, you're at LinkedIn now. This must happen on occasion. I said, so how do I merge the accounts? And so he said, you can't merge the accounts. You just have to delete one and put all your information in the other. I said, that does not sound like a very good technology solution. So
you just quit.
Well, so I haven't done a whole lot of it since
I'm
then.
done.
What is it? It's May? That was just in December. That was just 4 months ago.
It's just 4 months ago.
But the good news is I very regularly, probably 3 or 4 times a day, I get emails from people that want to be my friend on LinkedIn. It's not be my friend, though, is it? They want to connect with me. Now, what do they want to do? They want
to be connected because then it's
then we can communicate. Then
or there's like you're gonna see
friends
content
of
that's
friends.
related to mine. So like
I could start reading. I could start seeing more of all of you.
You can see all the videos like
videos
this one that we're gonna put on.
I can go online
you can actually
to find
see
that
some of the
there.
stuff that I've done, which you clearly
That's
have not.
true.
And
plus, I need to get my picture up there
which
because
we
that
got
will.
for you.
I know.
Yeah,
and that will get a lot more connections for me.
So if you ever did leave Duke, you could you might have a chance to get another job.
They'll have to cart me away in
they
a casket there.
You probably won't. It's just ironic that your son works there.
I know it is. Yeah. It is. That's not.
So in order for this video to go, we're gonna have to get you you have to get your profile done.
I will be official, and I will have.
But you're gonna get
connections
tons of
friends.
requests.
Probably. How many connections do you have on LinkedIn?
Over 2,000.
Really?
And I have over 1,500 followers.
That's a lot.
So you just followed me, which is crazy.
So what's the difference between a follower and a
because
connection? Do you even know 2,000? How do you know 2,000 people? If we got your list of 2,000 and we took the top 100 and I said, do you even know this person?
That's irrelevant.
Is this as important as Twitter? Do you have?
No, I don't do any of
you
those.
You don't do Twitter. You don't do.
I mean, maybe I should, but LinkedIn right now is.
You probably get more followers.
It's wide open. No, it's wide open because
anybody.
LinkedIn right now is the Facebook it was 3 years ago. Yeah. Whereas right now, if I went on Facebook, I'd have to pay. And even if I paid to get an organic reach,
to get business Facebook.
Yeah, use Facebook it's a business site.
Okay.
But
it's not as good as LinkedIn.
Well, no, it's just more saturated. The market's saturated. Mm. So LinkedIn right now is wide open. I mean, I had people that I was connected with last fall. But when I started doing the articles and the videos and video interviews,
so how much content do you have on LinkedIn?
I try to put something out every week.
Keep it fresh. Keep me coming back.
The theory is that you put something out every day or more.
Who has time for that?
Yeah, well, but you don't have to build that. I do.
Oh.
Because I'm trying to build.
Well, you're trying to build a following.
I'm trying to build
a
following. So people are like, oh, that's interesting. So I'm not selling. Forum. I'm basically saying
you're a thought leader.
Yeah, here's some things that we're talking about. And then I interviewed Ryan.
Right.
And sometimes they're just funny, and sometimes we're talking about
relevant stuff.
To
keep things going there.
To keep things interesting. So you saw one today. So that kind of thing. So you try to keep it so that it's.
So if I am a follower of yours.
Yeah, you're going to see my posts.
Then something comes to me via either a text or an email saying, "Hey, Ben's got something new," or I would just get on myself.
You go on LinkedIn and
I'd
be
go
like,
on to check things out.
In your feed, there'd be all these
checking out all my people.
Oh, look what Ben has, and he did this interview with He did an interview with Jamie and
so
Brad,
when people take a look at your content, they would then comment on it? Mm-hmm. Do you ever get any negative comments? Or are people pretty polite on LinkedIn?
No, they're much better on LinkedIn. Usually it's
nobody's trolling on LinkedIn.
No, it's like a conversation. So it's usually a conversation. I've only gotten one weird thing where I was like,
weren't sure what was going on.
I'm going to interview so-and-so. I put out a kind of like teaser, right? At a picture that Brian took and did a teaser. And somebody wrote, before you interview this person, I won't say his name, before you interview this person, you should know the truth. I was like, whoa.
There's a history there.
Oh, it was like, he was clearly had an extra grind. But I was like, okay, but I don't care.
There's too many people in the world.
But I don't get that. I mean, and it's crazy is like, I would say some of those interviews gotten over 5,000 views.
So beyond your circle of contacts.
So
friends of friends have.
Yeah, it got passed. Someone reshared it. Recently, I had one that was trending. LinkedIn told me it was trending.
Oh, it was in the top because it was getting a lot of hits.
The one I showed you today. That Caroline video I put
about the phone call situation. So that trended. That was on their top 10, 100, 1,000.
I don't know what that
means. It was getting a lot of touches.
It was getting a lot of.
Now, have you done a TED Talk?
No.
Why not?
You gotta get asked to get a TED Talk.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
You can't just make one up and send one in, and they can. I mean, they'll take anything.
That's how that works.
but do you have to get asked, or would you put one together and send it in and say, I think this would be a good one? No, you have to.
No, you kind of have to.
Did they have to come video you? Or they just have to approve your content?
No, you have to go to like the TEDx conference.
Oh.
Yeah, and sometimes like TEDx Detroit, they have one in Detroit. But you got to get asked. It's like a big deal.
Have you been to a TEDx conference?
No, it's expensive. Yeah, I don't want to pay that. You can just watch them on TV. I don't know.
It's very interesting, though.
It is interesting, but it's...
I mean, they have all their content, or a lot of their content on
the
internet, so you can go see it there. So you don't need to go to a TED Talk to gain all that knowledge there. But if you wanted to rub shoulders with the rich and famous,
but like smart. Our network is a niche network.
Well,
right?
definitely.
Like Revenue Cycle is a relatively niche network. What I realized was that just nobody was doing kind of just video interview type stuff for ours, and I thought, well, there's got to be. I know there's interesting things happening.
Yeah. And
we know there's interesting conversations that we're having at Leaders Forum, right? Which is the purpose, right? That we do these things, that we pull together the best leaders and they're talking. And,
get a dialogue going.
But then how could I give the people a snippet of kind of like the type of people that are coming and what are they talking about? And so that was the idea. And also the idea behind like even just sitting down with you is like, well, what, we could talk about anything, but like what's the most interesting, what are people resonating with? Because I don't think there's a lot of like fresh ideas, challenges coming out of a lot of places.
Yeah.
I just don't. I mean, I don't see it.
So I'll start us off on a topic that we may have chatted about this before, but this resonated more with me based on some of the discussions today, and that as we were talking at lunch with some folks about, somebody said, for Duke in your competitive market space, what's the biggest threat or risk that you think we're facing? And I told them that I thought that the biggest threat or challenge that we have is not actually competition from other providers, right? I mean, we're a large provider, but there's plenty of large, sophisticated providers. UNC is 10 miles away from us. There's a lot of players in North Carolina, but our biggest challenge is not really necessarily other providers, and by that I don't mean that they can't hold a candle to Duke. There's plenty of very good providers in our space there. Our biggest challenge really is how we effectively connect with payers and how we deal with the fact that we are both competitors in many respects. I mean, we're competing for ownership of where patients and members go, right? I mean, for a long time, providers say, well, we own the relationship with the patient, and in fact, insurance companies, we call them, by definition, we call them third parties. You're the third party to this relationship. It's really about patients and providers.
You sit in the back seat.
Yeah, exactly.
Mom and dad, right?
Right, we have that very derogatory term, third party.
Like
we'll let you in on this when you end the rest of it. But clearly, the payers are in the same fashion. They see the relationship, a financial one rather than a clinical one, primarily as being the primary relationship, and they see providers as being, providers come and go. We're going to take care of you financially,
Yeah.
and we will find a network of providers. Not so much they're a dime or a dozen, but they consider providers to be a relative commodity. And so our biggest challenge is not so much a payer is going to put us out of business, because the large health systems are the 800-pound gorillas in their marketplace. But how do we find that right balance between competition and collaboration? And that's what's really going on in most major marketplaces right now, is payers are realizing they are getting into the provider business. Not necessarily in a bad way. Heck, if I was on the payer side, I'd be looking at the same thing. You see payers basically opening up urgent care centers, getting into home health, hiring primary care practices, expanding both vertically and horizontally upstream into the healthcare space. And so providers are not, I would say, are not fully recognizing the competitive threat there. Now, some providers are getting into the payer space, right? Either self-insured plans or for their employees. The very large ones have enough financial resources to actually get into risk. But the truth be told, historically, providers have not been very good at managing risk. I mean, the handful of us that experimented with capitation 20 years ago did not work out well at all, and we've been loath to take on significant risk since then.
Right.
We'll see whether payers can actually be good at being a provider, or whether ultimately it's just going to force payers and providers to integrate in better ways than just fee-for-service contracts that define how much we're going to pay you piecemeal.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about today a bunch, right? And I guess one of the things that came out, one of the things that struck me was that we have a lot of talk about, we talked a lot about it.
Yeah. As we always do.
As we always do.
The question is, what's actionable
But how
from
do you,
that?
how do you move from talk to action, which is ultimately going to be the real test of all of this, right?
Yeah.
How do we move from, because we've been talked about, Dustin talked about it he's from United. Dustin talked about kind of like, we can make an impact in Arizona, but then we have all these other states with a state issue, we have a national issue.
I think it comes down to what happens in the marketplace that forces payers and providers and the other players that are in the healthcare space to change what they're doing. Right now, the problem is we're all relatively successful enough. Not necessarily full on fat, dumb, and happy, but we're in our space. We're reasonably profitable enough. We've got too much invested.
There's less incentive.
Right, we're too much invested in the status quo. So what's going to change that? Is the government going to step in and force the issue? Not known historically for doing that. We may not like it, but that may eventually come. Are patients going to eventually revolt and say it's too expensive? Maybe, but I look at that, and the average patient is dealing with this much the same way the frog that is boiling in the 1 degree at a time.
But don't you think there has to be some tipping point? I feel like the patient responsibility, has gotten almost just crazy.
It is.
If you look at kind of how much premiums are going up over the last 15 years, and then also how much out of pocket. I mean, we all know this, right? Yeah. But at some point, you have to imagine there has to be a tipping point.
There is.
So the question is this one of the times in which, normally I would never say the government making the decision would be a good thing.
Yeah.
But in this case, to get away from the state control and legal risk aspect, I think almost at this point the government may have to step in and be like, this is the way insurers are going to work with providers.
The question is, does the government, I would agree with you, in a more efficient system, the government would do that. Now, politics aside, everybody can point to situations where the government did something well or didn't do something well. And so it's hard to go too far down that path. But certainly the government has the capacity to do something like that. And it may not be the government defining a one-payer system, right? It may be the government defining a different set of rules, or removing some of the federal or forcing in some fashion state regulations to either relax or beef up in some areas. And again, even that is hard to figure out because you want to protect patient rights, PHI, and all the rest of that. But the fact that we've got 50 states, each with a different set of rules about what payers can do and what providers can do in being licensed, that adds a certain amount of administrative effort and cost into the process. and makes it more challenging to find a better way of providing that. So I do think it is, to some degree, finding a disruptor. Now, maybe the disruptor are large employers that are footing the bill for the rest of that. We'll see what happens with the Berkshire and Amazon consortium to take a look at.
Well, I think everyone's
the rest of that.
hoping, everyone even in healthcare is hoping that they can crack some kind of code.
Right.
But we've seen others come and fail.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I think it's because again, two things. Too many of the players have both lobbyists and have a vested interest. Providers, payers, big farm, all of that are comfortable enough in the status quo there. But I think the other big challenge that drives why is the cost of healthcare so high is, we talked about during the conference today how technology is changing our world, but the science and technology, we can do amazing things in healthcare that we couldn't even 10 or 20 years ago, but they are really expensive. And at what point does society say that makes sense or not? We can sit here rationally and say that $500,000 pill that gives you an extra 6 months of life, that may not make sense for society, but if it's your sister or my mom or a loved one that needs that, then everybody gets irrational and we want it, and we would like somebody else to pay for that. Well, somebody else is us. I mean, and so I'm glad in many respects that I'm not in that part of the business that has to define who gets care and who doesn't, and playing that godlike role, because that's an impossible task.
Well, I mean, I would argue we've been rationing care forever.
We have.
Because if tomorrow we wanted to cover every single person with insurance, we could do it.
Right. I mean,
instantly. We could just be like, yep,
rationing does. So yeah, the high cost of healthcare is certainly part of what makes it challenge to modify what's going to go on and what has to change in the marketplace right now. But I do think there's incremental opportunities, but gosh, it moves awfully glacially, right? I mean, I think when you talk to most people in the industry, we talk about change, but it happens slow. And part of it is because there's still not a high degree of concentration. And as we're all pushing towards fee-for-service to value-based, however you define value, quality, and cost, each payer has a different definition of that, right? I mean, so on the provider side, we're dealing with this as United and Cigna and Aetna and Anthem's rules, Medicare and Medicaid. And they're not completely dissimilar, but they are different definitions as everybody's trying to get a feel for what value is. Right.
I just think if someone brought up the point about financial services industry has figured it out, but the reality is they have big players. And they don't have as many private big players.
Well, they didn't always have big players.
So the question
there's
is
still a ton of small banks around there. But,
I mean, there was an incentive for them to standardize the transactions to bring the transaction level cost down.
Right.
There's still an incentive for us to do the same thing, and there's still an incentive for insurers to do the same thing. But this is where I think is there's just too many players on both sides. Yeah. I guess that's maybe the issue. So this is, I guess, one of those areas where I hate to even say it. The government's probably going to have to be this is
to come in and
because
and
we
dictate.
They did it with EMR.
Yeah.
The reason we have EMRs and Epics and Cerns of the world everywhere now is because they said
they forced that, and they forced it with some incentives, right?
Here's the incentive,
with the carrot and the stick there. And 30 years ago, when they came out with DRGs, I mean, that's before many of our time there, but I mean that was them stepping in pretty definitively. And so I think there's the opportunity there, partly because when you take a look at it, probably half of all healthcare in the United States is funded by the government. Yeah. Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, VA, the rest of that. I mean, so they have enough market share where, in fact, they could force the issue on a lot of things. Not just on how
not just risk and bundled and all that. That's
right.
I get those things.
What coverage policies are? How much of healthcare? I mean, we're getting into the politics again, but how much of healthcare is a right versus a privilege?
Yeah.
I think everybody wants healthcare to be a right, not a privilege, but unlimited healthcare is probably not a right. And so, again, where does someone define the bare basics that every American should be entitled to, and then what is a bonus? That line is hard to draw and hard to enforce.
Yeah, no, this is great. Well, Scott, we're live from Leaders Forum, day one of day one. What'd you think
All
of
right.
day one? What'd you?
I liked it. It was a good
What
mix
stood out to
of
you?
good mix of people on the provider and on the payer side. Some good dialogue. I liked the fact that at times we got into conversations that were a little uncomfortable. Right? This wasn't everybody just being polite to each other.
Yeah.
That is the value of a good dialogue, and so there were some obviously some discussions where there were two or more points of view, and folks stuck by their perspectives, which was nice to see. I mean, we can get the easy stuff anywhere. So I thought it was a good dialogue, and I thought it was timely and relevant to some of the things that we're looking at, the payer-provider relationships, and again, the backdrop of how technology and all of its variations, artificial intelligence, robotic processing, big data, is changing our world in healthcare and home.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
good stuff.
Well, thank you, sir.
Sure.
Appreciate the time.
All righty. Thanks.
All right.